Welcome to 6 African Trade Talks, the show that brings you closer to the intra-Africa trade business world. I'm your host, Chad Chawanda. In this episode, our guest is Donovan Chimhandamba. Donovan is the founder of Nyanza Light Metals. Donovan, welcome to 6 African Trade Talks. How are you?
Thanks, Chad. It's great to be back here again.
Great. Before we start our show, we'd like to hear it from our sponsors.
Advocado Africa is a pan-African digital marketing social enterprise. With the exponential growth in smartphone users in Africa, you have to take your marketing digital. Advocado can do that for you. Advocado, minding your business.
Africa is talking business. Be a part of it. IATF is the key event boosting trade in Africa. No other event brings together more professionals under one roof. In 2021, IATF's theme will focus on the newly launched African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, a single market for goods and services across 54 countries aimed at boosting trade and investment. To learn more, visit www.intraafricantradefair.com.
Donovan, give us an update on Nyanza Light Metals from the time we last met.
Chad, it's been a very interesting last 2 years in COVID coming into play. A lot has happened. A lot of strategic thinking has come into play as well. We have been forced to ask ourselves about certain things in how we shape or plan our future business. And we're at an opportune stage where we have the ability to change or adjust how we build our operation. So over the last few years since we last chat, we've made a couple of significant progress and key milestones we've achieved. The first one is we've managed to build what we call the Technical Services Center. So this is the heart and center of our operations going forward. What essentially it does, it's a mini production plant, but it allows us ahead of the full production for the plant to actually produce pigment and give customers in sufficient quantities for them to make final products like paints. So that's a huge milestone. We're busy going through the snag list with the contractor, handing over the building. We are installing the equipment, and we expect full commission to be completed by March. The other things that we've also managed to do since we last spoke is we've managed to onboard Afrimex Bank. Afrimex Bank is well known on the African continent and is spearheading intra-African trade. And getting them on board for us was a huge coup. And they're already playing an instrumental role in terms of how we're developing and shaping the project. So for instance, having Afrimex Bank on the board, we've started to look at ourselves not just as a titanium pigment plant, but as a wider mineral and manufacturing chemicals play. So that's a significant milestone. Afrimex Bank, the first $2 million is just to help us with the project preparation and packaging works that we're doing. But more importantly is that we have also appointed them as the lead arranger for the $350 million, where they've pledged a minimum $100 million as a minimum hold. So that's a big game. We have DTIC, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. They've been with us since the beginning, but they've also come on board again, provided more incentives to support the project. So they're quite instrumental. And from a South African government support perspective, we think we have the right partner who is strategically pushing for minerals beneficiation projects and industries to happen. And lastly, I think what we've done, you'll see that we're building a very good, competent team. I think we're at a point now where we're transitioning from being a project to an operating company. And that requires a different set of skills. And we're very proud that some of the members that we've brought in, like Clement Schluet, will be the director and general manager for our manufacturing operations. And then we also have Nolwazi Tetiana, who is a well-seasoned environmentalist from Department of Environmental Affairs. She was sitting on the other side, assessing all the environmental impact assessment applications. Now she's on board guiding Nyanza team in terms of making sure that we comply and meet our ESG principles that we have set ourselves for. We comply with the IFC environmental performance and social performance standards. And this is quite big. And you'll see over the next few months as we recruit and build a team that the kind of caliber and people we're bringing on board, resemble the serious intent that we have and we wish to achieve going forward. For now, I think those are some of the couple of actions on the ground that we've achieved over the last few months.
Thank you very much for sharing. Interesting to know about the progress. You received a funding of $2 million from Afrimex Bank. Any insights on the process of raising funding and what are the social and economic impacts of this venture?
So for starters, the $2 million is just to aid our project preparation and planning. And that entails, completing the detailed designs for the major plant that we will start constructing probably end of next year. That helps us with completing certain environmental studies, certain environmental and management program planning, and certain things around running our technical service center. So that $2 million is to ensure that when we now start constructing and building the business, we have dealt with all the surrounding activities that are required to make sure that the planning is correct and we implement according to that. The biggest success in Afrimex Bank that we have, which we will start seeing next year, is that we've appointed them as the mandated lead arranger, as I explained before. And they will be instrumental in syndicating various banks that we've already received expressions of interest all over the funding requirements that we have. So they'll be putting together the project finance, the syndicated facility, and within that, they've already pledged a minimum hold of $100 million. So I think that is the significance of having Afrimex Bank on board. When it comes to the second question around the social developmental impact, first and foremost is that we're creating Nyanza as a platform investment company. So although everyone knows about titanium pigment, by virtue of making titanium pigment, we'll be making a wider array of chemicals. So we'll be making the aluminum sulfates, we're looking at titanium carbide, we're looking at titanium nanomaterials or powders that are used in 3D printing. We'll make copperous or iron sulfate, which is used as a water purification chemical. So what we're building here is just not a pigment company. It's a center of excellence that will play in the broader chemicals and mineral beneficiation industry. And the impact of that is that Africa will now have a value addition platform to deal with progressing some of these minerals. Second thing is we needed to create local quality jobs. We export titanium raw materials at prices as low as $100, $120 a ton. And we import back titanium pigment at prices above $3,500. I've seen spot prices now almost getting close to $5,000 a ton. What it simply means for us or as Africa is that we have lost out in that value addition from $100 a ton to $5,000 a ton. Something is happening elsewhere and people are making money. So that is very transformative, and that's huge in terms of developmental impact. The third point is we're creating jobs. We've seen huge hemorrhage in Africa, especially South Africa over the last few years, and we have to reset the course for Africa and South Africa in terms of getting people back into jobs, getting people into quality paying jobs. And Nyanza will, during construction, have more than 2,000 people working. And once fully operational, we're looking at permanently employing 550 people. And the indirect jobs created with that, the numbers are staggering depending on how you apply your multiples. And then lastly, we obviously, by Nyanza being in Richards Bay, these are some of the poorest communities that you have in the country, and you are giving them an opportunity to participate in a high value addition supply chain. So there's a lot from a developmental impact that's happening. And for South Africa, from a trade balance perspective, we will substitute or in fact eliminate to a greater extent some of the importation around titanium. So that is where we think, amongst other things, we're contributing in terms of developing Africa.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing. How do we enhance value addition in the mineral extractive sector in Africa?
I think this is, we're at a crossroads as Africa. We're trying to address the job numbers, but at the same time, we don't have sufficient capital to fund our own initiatives, so we have to rely on international funding. Now, the international funding or the financial capital markets have moved far ahead, and they are largely driven by the agenda set by Europe, America, and China in terms of how they want to invest in the future. So by that, what we mean is that the capital that is available in the market has demands or requirements. For example, they have ESG requirements, SDG requirements. So ESG is environmental, social, governance issues. You have sustainability issues. You have issues around how you're contributing to climate actions, how you treat the environment, the people you work with. Now, when you take all of this in the context of us now trying to push mineral extraction and value addition in Africa, it means that what we are building going forward has to speak to these demands. So, when we look at coal, when everyone says coal must be eradicated, China is the biggest, probably 50% of coal usage sits with China, followed by America, probably 24%. South Africa is only just around about 2.4% in terms of coal consumption. But Eskom will not get any funding going forward to try and keep it running. So the biggest, I think, in terms of enhancing our value addition goals, while we have very little mineral extraction or value addition, we have an opportunity now to build modern manufacturing facilities that speak to all these future requirements. And we can set the pace and build sustainable industries that are addressing climate action goals, that are speaking to what we call the circular economy in terms of recycling and using materials that we can continue to reuse and reduce pressure on fresh raw materials in terms of production. So I think it's a big topic, but for us, we are very clear of this and we have embraced it in our design, and we've made sure that our operations meet IFC performance standards. We're looking at renewable energy, we're looking at renewable water supply, and even our raw materials for production, speak to our circular economy strategy.
You said something that is quite interesting there. The whole world has moved fast ahead, and we want to catch up, but we are now catching up with new conditions. So it's quite interesting. Based on this whole extractive sector and value addition, why is this important for intra-Africa trade to a value addition?
There's a scary stat I recently saw or read. Our value addition industries, in terms of processing basic raw materials, we are still under 5% of what Europe, America, or the Western world does. If we had chrome and China has chrome, or America has chrome, by the time chrome arrives to us, it is in a value-added product. We have tungsten, we have rare earth minerals, we have cobalt. We send it as some big block of raw material, but by the time you consume it, it's in a battery. By the time you consume it, it's in a cell phone. So our level of value addition is so low to the extent that we're still way below 5%. I think 5% is quite an exaggeration. But what that means in terms of intra-African trade is that not one country has to do all of these things. If the borders have fallen as planned or espoused by AFTA in terms of trying to reduce the borders between the countries, we must try and drive towards centers of excellence. So if one is good in terms of mining the resource, we must have other countries or geographies that are good in value addition. And by that, the value addition must go through 3, 4, 5 steps of value addition. One mines cobalt, one does the concentration, one produces lithium, cobalt, whatever it is, compounds, one produces batteries, one produces cell phones. By the time it leaves the continent, it must have gone through that. So the intra-African trade, for me or for us, should be more around how many times can a basic raw material go through process whilst it's still in Africa before it actually leaves the continent. So that's the importance for intra-continental trade. And with barriers gone, countries must stop trying to compete in everything. Countries must find centers of competence and allow the other partner to shine or grow that center of competence while you pick your own center of excellence.
It brings a memory. For example, the platinum mining industry, where Zimbabwe is mining platinum and then it comes to South Africa, it's value added. It would be nice to then get to the point where, for example, your catalytic converters are made maybe in Botswana and stuff like that. So thank you very much for sharing that. Before we continue, I would like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Did you see that billboard? No, I didn't. I was looking at my phone. That's how billboard advertising is now ineffective. If you ever wondered how to employ people with disabilities, then by working with Advocado, you would have just done that. Advocado is a social enterprise focusing on using digital marketing to create employment for people of determination and young women across Africa. Let's do it together. If you want to make a difference, contact us now at www.advocado.africa.
So Donovan, tariffs alone are not the biggest impediment to intra-continental trade. Poor infrastructure and the low level of manufacturing in some countries mean they don't produce a significant amount of finished goods to export. What is your take?
Absolutely. That's very true. I'd still like to touch on the tariffs themselves. I think tariffs are a strategic instrument to promote certain growth and protect certain industries. But at the same time, we've seen tariffs being used in a very dangerous way that is not strategic in terms of what the country is trying to develop. And they can end up becoming a cost of doing business for the country and make it unattractive in the long term. So by that, what we mean is that when tariffs are put in place to support an upcoming industry, and there is action within that industry that is strategic and that allows your industry to develop before and protect it against dumping and foreign competition. But in the long term, those businesses must have a competitive advantage. But tariffs that are put in place when you don't have a manufacturing industry and then you charge 100% on cars and importation just becomes a cost of doing business in the country. So tariffs are an important instrument, but tariffs alone, again, they're not an impediment to the continent's growth. I think infrastructure is one of the key impediments. There's certain businesses that rely on sustainable, or what I would say a reliable supply of water, reliable supply of electricity, or access to logistics infrastructure. So if you end up producing some of these high value goods and you're sitting in a place where you don't know when there will be electricity, the trucks or vehicles or whatever that needs to come and collect the goods, it takes 7 hours to drive through 150 kilometers. Those are the things that can render a very good idea or project uncompetitive. And we see this across Africa, across the entire African geography, that the biggest impediment to some of these opportunities is access to these opportunities or the availability of quality infrastructure. On another scale, also, I think political stability, social unrest, those also come into play. Generally, these are sort of like the intangibles that most bankers spend more time analyzing, and probably before they even worry about the numbers from the project. So, countries demonstrating good governance, good political maturity becomes very important, and how they deal with social unrest when it happens is also very important and is reflective on how foreign investors would look into the country. So if you're looking at the kind of business that we're talking about, we're not talking about investing on the stock exchange where you can wake up and sell off your stock and move to the next country. We're talking about fixed capital gross formation, talking about building plants. When there's a riot, you can't uproot your plant and take it away. So when investors do these kind of investments, they actually have to have the confidence in the political maturity and stability and the governance of the country. So those are some of the issues that actually, when you look at some of these geographies for intra-African trade, we have various nuances when you move from country to country, and trying to get the continent to a level of sophistication and stability that allows intra-African trade is one of the areas that our leaders on the continent must continue to try and foster.
You raised an interesting insight about infrastructure and, just stability of an economy or of a country politically or economically. And these are some of the things that entrepreneurs in particular countries underestimate, but they've got a huge impact in terms of anything that they want to do. So thank you very much for sharing that. What is the extent of intra-continental trade so far in Africa?
I think I've mentioned the start. We are, intra-African trade. I think I was sitting with Professor Benedict Orama, President and CEO of Afrimex Bank, at their roadshow 2 months ago in Durban. And he mentioned the start, if I understand to be corrected, but he said at best we are around about 8 to 10% at best of what the other regions do in terms of intracontinental trade. Even that 8 to 10%, I think, it's a far stretch to get it, but that shows you that there's more trade that happens between African countries and other international countries outside Africa than the amount of trade that happens amongst ourselves. And that alone tells you that we're just sort of like an exporter of basic raw materials, and no one is trading amongst themselves to do further value addition or, things like that. But the level is very low. And a lot of work has to be done. And we see the multilaterals led by Afrimex Bank and other multilateral banks through this intra-African trade fair, symposiums, etc., that they're trying to promote that and encourage intra-African trade. But it's going to need a lot more work, and those activities or actions are just the beginning. After coming into play also is quite instrumental, the African Free Trade Continental Agreement. I think it paves the way for some of these things to start happening. Ourselves, we've spent enough or considerable time understanding what it means, where can we benefit in terms of continental trade or exporting within the continent, and we're positioning ourselves to take advantage of that.
As a venture capitalist, how do you identify a venture capitalist?
I think for me, it's more about early stage investor. An investor doesn't necessarily mean the one who puts the money, it's the one who's building a project from an idea or concept right through to commercializing it. So, that's what I would call a venture capitalist. And, any capital that you put towards these risky startups, it's being a venture capitalist. We need more of people who invest in early stage funding or projects on the continent so that, we have a healthy pipeline of great ideas coming to the market where the commercial and traditional banks and financial capital markets can actually come into play. So the more we can spend or have government institutions play in that space, the stronger, the healthier the African economy will be.
What's the most important question a VC can ask?
It's about scalability, the gap that you see in the market. In terms of the gap in the market, is it a structural gap that needs, a long-lasting solution, or is it a transitory opportunity where, it's created by short-term supply chain challenges? So those are some of the things that you need to understand. If it's structural, then you've got something to build a business around. If it's transitory, you know that that opportunity will cease to exist in the near term. Scalability is very important. How big can this business go? Is it repeatable? Is it a one-off pony trick? Those are some of the things that you must understand. If it's not scalable, you're going to invest a lot in building certain capabilities or competencies, and you can't use them again elsewhere in other industries. So those are some of the basic questions. If it's scalable, that means that your dollar can scale up or be multiplied 10, 20, 100 times through scale and other funders coming in, etc. So those are important questions I would ask.
What's your favorite book or podcast and why?
There's a couple, but of late I've been listening to a podcast by, I think, a guy called Stephen Hayward, who sort of like compiles, in fact, the book where the podcast is being read from is called Understanding the Life, Accomplishments, and Successes of Ronald Reagan. So I'm a big fan of Ronald Reagan. I think amongst many other leaders that we've seen in the world, and some from Africa, he still stands out there as one of the greatest leaders to ever happen. So I try and draw inspiration and leadership skills from the likes of him. I'm also big on strategy and game theory. So, recently I'm trying to understand, for example, I read military books because military, it's about life and death. When you're faced with life and death, you make real decisions. It's no longer child's play. So if you want to understand strategy, you have to try and draw inspirational learnings from military. So I'm reading, I was trying to understand this whole Iraq war, and there's a book called Plan of Attack by, can't remember who wrote the book. I think it's Bob Woodward, and it chronicles the events leading to Iraq war and how the decisions were made and stuff like that. Although we all know now that that Iraq war decision was probably flawed, but I think from my perspective, it's just to understand how some of these strategic actions are taken and how they're influenced.
My business is growing. Thanks to Advocado Africa, digital marketing is the way to go. I get to know what my customers want and how they feel in real time. Besides, I choose how much to spend. I feel in control. If you want to take control of your marketing, contact Advocado Africa now. Visit www.advocadoafrica. Advocado Africa. We mind your business.
Africa is a continent full of potential, but potential means nothing if we don't take action to create value. Let us take action. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to post and share this episode on your social media platforms. It will help us reach our mission of sharing knowledge about intra-Africa trade and making it available to as many people as possible. Let us grow our continent. We can go far, fast, together. If you can please leave a review on our podcast page or on Apple Podcasts. See you next time.